It started with a strange sound. At first I thought it was the wind, a low, haunting whistle that seemed to wrap itself around the trees. Eric told me it was nothing, just the forest breathing, but it didn't feel like nothing, it felt wrong. As the hours passed, the whistling grew louder, closer, until it felt like it was circling our cabin. We were sitting by the fire inside when it became impossible to ignore. Eric tried to play it off again, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes kept darting to the window. Maybe it's an animal, I suggested, though I didn't really believe that. No animal made sounds like that. I'll check it out, Eric said, grabbing a flashlight. Stay here. I didn't like the idea of him going out there alone, but I stayed by the window, watching as he stepped out into the darkness. The trees swallowed him almost immediately, the light from his flashlight barely making a dent in the thick night. I pressed my face against the glass, straining to hear him, to see something, anything, but all I could hear was the whistling, and then abruptly it stopped. For a moment the world outside the cabin was dead silent. No wind, no animals, not even the sound of Eric moving through the brush, just absolute suffocating stillness. "Eric!" I called out, panic rising in my throat. No response. I walked toward him, slowly at first, and that's when I noticed something odd. The air was too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl. I kept moving, but with every step the feeling of being watched grew stronger, more oppressive. I was about 10 feet away from him when I saw it. A figure, tall and gaunt, stood just beyond Eric. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, stretched tight over its bones. Its eyes, black and hollow, were locked onto him, its lips curled into a grotesque smile. It was tall, too tall, its limbs unnaturally long, the fingers twisted and sharp like claws. "Eric!" I shouted, louder this time. My heartbeat pounded in my ears as I stared into the trees. Nothing. I grabbed my own flashlight and burst through the front door, fear clouding my mind. The moment I stepped outside, the air felt thick, like I was moving through something heavy, something alive. I shined the light into the woods, the beam cutting through the fog that seemed to have rolled in from nowhere. And that's when I saw him. Eric was standing about 20 feet away, perfectly still. His back was to me, his head tilted slightly to one side, like he was listening to something I couldn't hear. "Eric!" I called out again, but he didn't move. My pulse raced. Something was wrong. I froze. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. This couldn't be real. It had to be a trick of the light, some kind of sick joke. But then it moved. It leaned in close to Eric, its mouth opening impossibly wide as it whispered something in his ear. I couldn't hear what it said, but I saw Eric flinch, his body jerking like he'd been shocked. And then he turned towards me. His face was blank, expressionless, eyes dull, like he wasn't really there. His mouth opened, and for a second I thought he was going to speak, but instead a thin stream of blood trickled from his lips. He took a step toward me, and that's when I saw it, his throat. It had been slit open, a deep, jagged cut from one ear to the other, but he was still standing, still moving toward me. I screamed, stumbling backward, tripping over my own feet as I scrambled to get away. I turned and ran toward the cabin, heart slamming against my ribs. I didn't stop until I was inside, slamming the door shut and locking it, my hands shaking uncontrollably. For a few moments, everything was quiet again. I pressed my ear to the door, listening. Nothing. Maybe it was gone, maybe whatever that thing was. It had taken Eric and... The whistling started again. Low at first, barely audible, but growing louder with each passing second. And then I heard it, scratching. Long, slow scratches, like nails dragging down wood. I backed away from the door, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The scratching moved around the cabin, circling it, never stopping. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen, clutching it to my chest as I backed into the corner. The whistling grew louder, more insistent, until it felt like it was coming from inside my own head. Then the knocking started. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the door. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block it out. Another knock, louder this time. And then a voice, soft and familiar. "Let me in," it whispered. "It's me, Eric, but I knew it wasn't him, not anymore." Wasn't. I stayed there all night, knife in hand, shaking and sobbing until the sun rose. The knocking and the whistling stopped just before dawn. When I finally opened the door, Eric was gone. So was the thing that had taken him. The police never found him. They told me he must have gotten lost in the woods, that it was an animal attack, but I know the truth. That thing, it's still out there, waiting. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right, I hear that whistle again. I pray it never finds me.